So this is the story of the Bridge of Transformation. And I'll pick this story up the week my father died, which was 2 years ago this week. And the week my father died 2 years ago, that's not the subject of this story, it's just the context. The week my father died, I got a phone call from one of my best friends. And this phone call was about my best friend telling me that he had just been diagnosed with cancer as well. That's really what this story is about and where this story begins. So, my father dies of cancer. It was a pretty intense experience, as I'm sure you can imagine, and had a lot of emotions involved in it. And my wife and I had moved in with him to support his transition on. So it was kind of our whole life for the last couple years leading up to this. And so with my father passing, part of my grief journey was that I decided that I was going to go lead some expeditions out in the wilderness. And so I found an ecotourism company that aligned with my values, and I signed up, and I would be leading expeditions in Denali National Park and Glacier National Park. And so I get to Alaska, and I'm leading these expeditions around Denali, and it's utter chaos. It's just pure madness. The woman who is meant to be training me ends up getting fired during my training, which left me more of a do not what she did, do something else, rather than teaching me what to do. So I have this rough experience in Alaska. I'm learning that I'm going to have to be winging it. And then I'm headed to Montana to lead these next 2 trips in Glacier National Park. And I'm in the airport. I'm on my way to Montana, and I get a call from my friend. And he's not doing well. And it becomes pretty clear that he's getting pretty close to the end of his life. And he's scared and he's confused. And we have no idea what this means or for how long. And so I end up just comforting him, supporting him, telling him I love him, and that immediately after leading these 2 trips, I'd be headed straight to his house after this to be there with him. And so I'm headed to Montana with this heaviness on me. My head is kind of clouded. I don't know what to make of this conversation I just had, or this experience that I just had in Alaska that was total chaos. And so I get to Montana, and I had been promised that in Montana, especially after what happened in Alaska, in Montana, I would be paired with a pair of seasoned, local, expert, veteran guides. I'll never forget that phrase because I was told repeatedly that I would get seasoned, veteran, expert, local guides that would be training me for my first trip, and then I would be taking charge on the second trip. So I'm sitting there in the hotel restaurant having breakfast, waiting for these seasoned, expert local guides to come. And these 2 women walk up to me that are no more than 22 years old. And they look at me and they're like, "Oh, you're Colby, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Oh, great. Like, I'm your co-guide and she's your assistant." And I'm looking at them like, "Oh, okay. How many of these trips have you led?" One of them just arrived, and the other had shadowed one sort of similar trip once. So instead of getting 2 seasoned, local, veteran, expert guides who had done this trip a million times and would be training me, I was paired up with 2 women who this was their first job out of college. They had never done any field work like this before, one of which had never done the trip or even been to Montana before, and one of them kind of had done this trip before. So I start to understand what kind of trip I'm getting myself into here, and that even though I'm kind of in training, I'm really going to have to step up and be a leader on this trip. So I'll never forget sitting there at the first dinner and looking around and having my 2 co-guides with me and seeing this group of 12 and knowing that for the next 10 days, their lives were in my hand and that I was really going to have to step it up and dig really deep to be able to navigate the ambiguity of this trip that I don't really know a whole lot about, that I will be guiding with these very high-paying guests. So we start the trip, and, for the most part, things are going pretty well. We get through the first half of the trip. It's clear that we are figuring it out as we go, but the guests are in good spirits. Everything seems to be going well. One of the biggest issues was that many of these people signed up for this trip pre-COVID, and now that we were able to open these trips back up and they were coming on these trips, they weren't really ready for these long hikes and these extended periods of exercise that this trip itinerary entailed. So we were working, we were being flexible, we were making it happen. And then we get to Canada, and we get to the Canada portion of the trip, and there's this beautiful hotel in Canada that we're staying at. It's like a Swiss chalet. It's right on a lake. It's this gorgeous little town. We're having a great time there. Things are going as smooth as you would expect. It could be much, much worse, but we're making it happen. And then we are going to set up for the hike for the day. And we had to have a hiking guide that was a local with us in Canada. And so I told my two co-guides, why don't you two take this hike off? I'll go with the co-guide and the guests that can hang on this hike. So we start to go on this hike, and I'm already not excited about it. It's the guests that we have that are capable of doing this hike are also the guests that stop at every flower and every bee and every bird and every butterfly and want to know what it is and all about it. And I'm totally that guy, so I'm trying to be cool. I've entertained them for a while. I'm kind of getting over it. But now we have a new guide. We have this Canadian hiking guide, and being this kind, generous Canadian as he is, every single time they stop about a bird, a bee, a butterfly, or a flower, he stops the entire hike. He turns to them. He gives them his full attention. He explains the genus, the species, the background, the origin. And I'm like, come on, man. Let's get through this hike. So this hike is taking longer than I like already. I'm feeling this kind of urgency boiling in me. We're in this beautiful place. It's going really, really well. And we get to the midpoint of the hike. And up until this point, I hadn't had phone service in days. I've been in the middle of the Canadian wilderness, hadn't even really checked my phone or touched my phone a whole lot. I knew it wasn't going to work anyways, and I was really enjoying being mostly disconnected. So we get to the midway of this hike, and it's this beautiful waterfall. It's two waterfalls next to each other. It's this double waterfall coming down. It's picturesque. You can't hear anything but the waterfall. We just were so engulfed in this moment. And I tell the group that I'll take a group photo of them at this waterfall. It's this awesome spot. And so I get them all organized in front of the waterfall, and I pull out my phone, and I pull it up like I'm ready to take a photo. And as I do, I look at the screen, and somewhere on this hike, I got service, and I'm reading the transcript of a voicemail that I got that morning. And they're looking at me like, what's taking so long in this photo? And I'm reading this voicemail, and it's from a friend saying that our mutual friend died of cancer that morning. And I'm just standing there, just holding this phone, seeing this waterfall crashing behind these people that I just guided here that I don't even want to be around. And I just instantly get this feeling that the entirety of my life is nothing more than a drop of water that's falling down that waterfall. And I look over to my side and I see an aspen tree there. And there's all these leaves on it. There's some really small leaves. There's some really old leaves that look like they're about to fall off. And I start to realize that my life is but a leaf on this aspen tree. And sooner than I know it, my leaf is just going to fly off that tree and just become a decomposed bit of fiber and carbon and leaf litter. And I grab a leaf off of this aspen tree, and I'm just looking at it, and I had taken the photo. I gave the group a minute. I didn't say a word about the message that I received, and I said, let's get back to the hike. It's time to go. So we go back on this hike, and I hang back 20, 30 feet. I tell everyone I'm going to trail. I'll follow behind, make sure everybody makes it on the hike. And I just stand back there and just weep and weep and weep. And I so just remember this feeling of feeling so simultaneously part of nature and held by nature, and that this is how nature happens, while also feeling like nature didn't give a shit about me. And the most value that I had to nature was food for some fungus that was going to come and find me decomposing somewhere. And I'm just sitting there literally holding a leaf and looking at this leaf and just weeping and knowing that I am this leaf and this leaf is me. So I hold it together long enough that we make it through the longest freaking hike of my life, get our guests back to the van, get them back to the hotel, and then I debrief with my 2 co-guides, and I just break down and I explain what had happened on this hike. And they were so supportive and encouraging and gave me so much love and empathy when I so needed it. And I'm so grateful to both of them. And they told me to take the rest of the day off. They said, the rest of the day is yours. We know you're going through a lot. We'll take care of dinner and we'll bring you some. And I was just so humbled by their compassion in that moment. And so I took some time to myself after this, and then we had a group call, me and a group of close friends who all knew this friend who had just passed away. We're on this call, and there's laughter and tears and just the whole range of the grief experience. And while I'm in this call, my co-guide, she keeps calling me. And she knows that I'm out for the night, and she's calling me. And I'm trying so hard to ignore her calls so I could stay in this space with these people as we grieve. And because I'm ignoring their calls and texts, then I hear a knock at my door. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, just give me this space, you know? And so I pause my group call, I go, and it's our assistant guide, and she's at the door. And she's like, I know that you're in your call. I'm so sorry to do this, but your co-guide has just come down with COVID. And she won't be able to guide the hike or the trip any further this time around. And I'm just looking at her, just speechless, absolutely speechless. And I realized that I got to step up. I have to man this trip. And not only do I not have a co-guide, who is the only person who's been on even a similar itinerary to this trip, not only is she gone, but now I have to lead this trip that I have never been on before in these places that I've never experienced firsthand myself. The assistant is going to have to lead in the second vehicle with the rest of our guests while I'm in the lead vehicle. I have to completely put my grief on the shelf. And at first I'm frustrated and I want to be selfish. And then I remember this leaf that I'm holding and how it's never about the experience of the leaf. The leaf is merely there for the tree. And so I snap out of it, I put my grief up on the shelf, and I look her in the face and say, all right, let's do it. Let's go. We modify the rest of the itinerary. I tell the guys I have to leave the group call. I basically pull an all-nighter. We COVID test every one of our guests. We figure out what to do next. We plan the next couple steps of the itinerary, and it's go mode. And now Not only am I navigating the grief of my best friend dying completely suddenly and pretty unexpectedly at this time, I was supposed to see him at the end of this. Now I don't get to. I've got all these feelings of grief and overwhelming anxiety swirling. And like, now I'm not just part of a team. I'm the guy. I'm the guy. I'm the only guy that can lead this trip in this moment, at this time, in this place. And it was just such a mix of despair and courage just coming together and converging in one of the most powerful ways I've ever experienced. And it was my time to step up and make this happen and finish strong. And so sure enough, we did. It wasn't pretty, but we got through the rest of that trip. We got through the next 4 or 5 days. Everybody was very understanding. They by this point had figured out that we're just getting through the trip. This isn't about whether or not you got the right second glass of wine with dinner. This is just about making sure you got some dinner. This wasn't about making sure we made it on time to things. This was just making sure we made it to the right bed so we had a place to sleep for the night. But sure enough, we did it. We made it through this trip. We were able to navigate it with a pretty high level of efficiency, all things considered. We drop the guests off, breathe a sigh of relief, and I shake it off. Now I've got 36 hours before the next trip starts, in which still don't have a co-guide, got another 14 people coming on in, and I got to not only prep for that trip, decompress from the last trip, but I can't just sit there and do nothing. I'm not the kind of guy to sit in a hotel room and eat my feelings. Like I got to go and do something and shake this out of my body. And conveniently, one of my really, really good friends from one of the camps that I used to work at, solid dude, he actually is a whitewater rafting guide just outside the city where I'm at, where I've been guiding these trips. And coincidentally, he's got the day off, and he's willing to take me and a couple of his friends on a rafting trip on like my one day off. So I'm thrilled. He knew the friend that had just passed away as well. We were super close. I was so excited to see this guy who I used to be his boss at a summer camp, and I taught him how to guide different programs like archery and hiking, and now he is leading whitewater rafting. I'm so excited. I'm so proud. So we go on this whitewater rafting trip, and we're like prepping for the day, and it is stormy. It is so stormy. It's overcast. It's looking dark over here. It's looking gray over there. It's a pretty sketchy day. And we're laughing and we're like, well, should we go? Should we not go? I can't reschedule. This is like my one chance to go on this trip. He's been doing this long enough. He's like, a little rain, that's nothing. On my worst day, we had hail. A little rain is nothing. So we figure, okay, this is as good a day as any, I guess. And we decide that we're going to go on this trip. So we put the raft in the water. We get in the raft. We're going. It's raining on us, of course. And again, we're like, well, at least it's not hail, right? This is fine. We get a moment where we get a break in the weather. We're able to pull the raft out, just enjoy ourselves, have a little lunch. I get to affirm this friend of mine for just what a leader and a man he's become, how he's grown, how he's developed, how proud I am of him. We get back in the raft. We're ready for Act 2. And it's raining on us. And it's raining and it's raining. And then I start hearing these little tick marks on my helmet, and it's not raining anymore. Now it's hailing. So sure enough, my one day off from absolute utter chaos, guiding these trips in these crazy remote wilderness areas, I happen to choose the one day to go whitewater rafting that it's not only raining on us, but it is hailing on us. And it is the craziest weather that I have ever rafted, kayaked, done any water sports in. And there's 6 of us on this boat, and there's nothing we can do but make it down the river. And I just remember, I will never forget this moment of all 6 of us just pumping and paddling with all of our might, just everything we had. And we were just getting it out physically. And I just remember feeling just physical exertion and exhaustion and mental and emotional just drain just right at the forefront. And I just was paddling as hard as I could, trying to work through all these emotions that I was feeling and the space that I was trying to create for myself. And it was just working and working. And we finally get through this gnarly spot with all these rapids and all this hail. And we felt so alive in that moment to be in that space together, working through these like really tough physical challenges and obstacles in front of us. Just felt so alive. And the weather's starting to die down a little bit. We come around this corner and I see this really big, beautiful bridge in front of me. And it turns out that this big bridge used to be the entrance to Glacier National Park. And then in the 60s, this huge flood came and washed the top of this bridge completely off. And so they ended up moving the entrance to Glacier National Park to a non-bridge, and they turned this bridge into a wooden-topped walking bridge. So we like show up, this beautiful big bridge. It's just like so big and powerful and poignant in my mind. And so we go and we pull the raft out of the water right in front of this bridge. We have to like carry it up this gnarly embankment to get the raft out. We get the raft out, and my friend and his partner, they leave to go get the van so we can pick up the raft, put it on top, and then drive to where we were going. So it's me and another couple, and we're just standing there on this bridge, at this bridge, and my friends leave, and I'm standing in front of this bridge, and I can see all the way down this bridge. And on the right side of me, where we just came from, it's just so stormy and violent and dark and twisted, and I can see rain coming down in different areas and hear thunder, and it just is pure chaos and raw energy, and it's just so dark and stormy. And then I look over to my left, which is where we're headed, and I swear it's blue skies. It's blue skies. It's not raining. There are no clouds. There's birds chirping. I can see for miles, and it just has such a happy, optimistic feeling to it. So I look from where I'm coming from, and it's just dark and stormy. And I look to where I'm headed, and I see that it is just these clear, inviting skies. And in that moment, I realize that this bridge, in this moment, this is my bridge of transformation. This is my opportunity to go from who I was, where it was dark and stormy, to who I'm meant to be, which is this bright, bright light in the sky. And so I take a step on this bridge, and I start to feel just these emotions start to well up. And I take another couple steps, and I start to cry a little bit, and I start reflecting on just all of the times that my life has been so stormy. And I think about all my loss and all my grief, and I'm just taking step after step across this bridge and thinking of my hurts and my regrets and the ways that I've been wronged. And I take another step and I think of the ways that I've wronged others. And I think of just this chaos, this tumultuous being who struggles through and isn't able to navigate what they're going through. And I make it to the other side of this bridge, and I just start weeping. And as I'm crying on the other side of this bridge, the sky just cracks open above me and just starts pouring on me, just absolutely pouring on me. And I'm just standing there, just crying so hard and just letting this rain just wash it all away, and just soaked in the washing away of my suffering and my misery and my sadness and my grief of losing my father and everything that was, and the passing of one of my best friends, and what this means for my life going forward, and I cry and I cry. And then I step back up to this bridge of transformation. And I look at this bridge and I know that this is the beginning of something new. This is where I go from this chaotic weather living inside of me to being able to forge a new path that is clean and pure and washed from all of this suffering. And I realize that what this means is becoming the leaf on the tree. Up to this point, I spent a long time thinking that I was the tree. You hear the cheesy phrase, be a tree, know your roots, stretch your branches. I'm not the tree. I'm a leaf on the tree. And my life, as big as it can get, as much as I could grow my life, is but a leaf, lasting for less than one season on a tree. And I take my first step back across the bridge of transformation. And I realize that my values up to this point were things like significance and certainty. And I take another step and I start thinking about what I want my values to be. I take another step and I think about what's valuable about a leaf. And I take another step and I start to decide that going forward, my true values would be growth and contribution. How can I grow to be the biggest leaf I can be so that I can contribute that much more to my mother tree? How can I show up for the tree that I am on with contribution as the end goal and growth as the way that I can show up for it? So I take another step and I take another step, and these tears that I'm feeling, they go from sadness to joy, and I'm still crying so much. This poor couple that was there met me that day. They must have seen me looking like a wild man, walking across this bridge crying, looking sad on the way there, and coming back crying with a big grin on my face, walking back towards them. But I realized that, man, I'm not the tree. I'm a leaf on this tree. So I start to feel refreshed. I start to feel anew. My friends come back with the van. We put the raft on top. We drive out of there. And the next day, the next trip starts. And I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling spirited. I'm feeling excited. And we get a whole new group. They don't know anything about anything that had happened the week before. And I'm seeing this as my fresh start as a leaf on the tree. And I went so hard as a leaf on the tree. I was supportive and I was encouraging and I was friendly and I was helpful and I was communicative and I was there and present for the experience. And then my co-guide ends up joining us again halfway through the trip. And it just gets that much better because now there are 3 of us again. My co-guide is back. We only have half the trip left. Things are going really well. We're getting this fresh start. And then we go back up to Canada. We're back in Canada. Things are good. And then we end up at this same trailhead of the same waterfall hike where I found out that my friend had passed away just a week before. And as we start this hike, we have a new hiking guide, and he starts telling us immediately on this hike that there was a fire that went through here not long ago, and he talks a lot about just rebirth after fire and all the symbolism that fire brings in terms of being able to start anew. And he talks about how the quaking aspens are one of the first species in this area that comes back after a fire. And he's pointing out this beautiful aspen tree right next to us. And it all starts to hit me that it was an aspen leaf at the top of this waterfall that started this whole journey of becoming a leaf on the tree. And so I'm looking at this aspen tree that he's talking about, and there's this tiny little baby aspen leaf, and I just knew I had to take it with me. And so I plucked this little leaf off the tree, and we do this hike, and I hang out mostly in the back, and I'm just really just holding this leaf and just really reflecting on my experience being this very leaf from the tree. We go through this whole hike, we get to the waterfall, and I gathered everyone around and I told them this story that I had undergone about my friend passing and me finding out at this very waterfall, and about the experience that I had had. And then I take this leaf that I had collected and I passed it around the group. And we had an entire memento mori where we realized the value of life and the presence of death and how we too are all leaves on the tree. We have a moment of silence for my friend. We spend some real time honoring his presence and his existence, get a lot of love and support, and we start walking back, and we make it back from that waterfall hike. And I'm feeling like $1,000,000 at this point. Everything's going well, nothing's going wrong. I'm starting to work through my grief again. I've been able to pull it off the shelf, start feeling my feels, start open up, be a little more vulnerable. And then that same night in that same hotel, one of our participants, one of our clients, isn't feeling well. He's starting to feel sick. So we get him a COVID test. And sure enough, he tests positive for COVID. And we've been riding around in these tiny little cramped spaces for the better part of a week now. And I know it's not just him. And also, in the back of my mind, I'm reflecting on a conversation that I had with a really rude bellman earlier that day, in which he told me that if a single member of any group at the hotel tests positive for COVID, the entire group is immediately kicked out, no questions asked. And we didn't have a backup plan. So I'm trying to keep this as under wraps as possible. I'm trying to keep my cool, trying to mitigate any exposure of any of my guests to anybody else, trying to figure out a new dinner plan, and we get COVID tests to everybody. Now at this point, words from our higher up come into us, and they are recommending that it makes the most sense for my co-guide who just got over COVID to take these guests back because she is least predisposed to get COVID again, and she was already kind of low energy to begin with, so I was still the one leading the hike. Well, I pull her aside, we talk about that, and it's very clear that she is not mentally and emotionally able to take a van with the now 7 COVID positive patients who we just had to tell that not only do they have COVID, their trip is officially over and they will be driven straight to the airport in the morning. So it's clear she's not having it and she will not be able to navigate that experience. So, being a leaf on the tree, focusing on my contribution, I decide I'll step up and take them. So I freaking double, triple mask up. I'm hanging with my head outside the window of the car the whole time. And I have to drive these 7 angry, irritable, sick COVID patients 7 hours around Glacier National Park to the only airport around to tell them, congratulations, your trip is over, sayonara. I'm sure you can tell they were thrilled. So we get through this 7-hour road trip. I'm so exhausted. I'm so over it at this point. And my only hotel room that I have for the night is on the itinerary back in Glacier National Park. So I drop everyone at the airport, and then I got to drive back into the national park and drive back to the hotel just so I could stay in my hotel room for the night. So I do this. I go back to the national park. I get to the hotel. I'm exhausted. I'm so worn out. And literally right as I get there, the 2 co-guides, I see on my phone when I connect to Wi-Fi that they are just about to leave for dinner. And they asked if I want to join them. And part of me is so tired, so exhausted, so over all of this that I want nothing to do with it and I just want to leave. And I remember that this restaurant was the best restaurant on the entire itinerary And the tortellini with elk sausage and a pesto cream sauce with huckleberry lemonade, finished with that decadent chocolate mousse. I could not pass up the opportunity to have this meal one last time. I just couldn't do it. It was that or hotel food. I had to go to dinner with them. So I was like, okay, fine, I'm coming. So I just threw my stuff in my room, jumped back in my car, drove to the hotel, drove to this fancy restaurant, sat socially distanced at a table by myself, 6 feet from everyone else. We have a great dinner. The elk sausage and tortellini with pesto cream was so worth the trip out there. And we finished dinner. Everything goes really well. And my co-guide says, okay, we're going to go do our final closing circle, like reflection activity. And I'm like, okay, sure. She's like, I know just the place. Just jump in your van and follow behind us. I'll drive and you follow and we'll get there. And I'm like, sure, great. I don't know this area at all. And we're going, and like the week before, we did the closing circle on like a dock by the lake. Like it was a pretty spot, but it was whatever. And so I'm thinking we're just going to pull off somewhere at the side of the woods or like find somewhere by the lake. I'm not thinking anything of it. So I'm following. We're driving for 15, 20 minutes. And things start to look really familiar to me. And I'm starting to recognize the turns. And even though I could not have gotten back there on my own if my life depended on it, sure enough, exactly a week later, I end up back at the Bridge of Transformation. And I'm just speechless. I'm just sitting there looking at this bridge, blown away, thinking I would never see this place again. And here I am right in front of it, ready to lead a closing ceremony. So I ask if I can be the one to lead the closing ceremony. And I tell them all this exact story. I tell them this exact story in as many details as I could remember. I'm crying. I'm taking as long to tell it then as I'm taking to tell it now. I'm sharing, and everyone is just feeling my lived experience so deeply, standing on the Bridge of Transformation with me at this time. And so we all go to the aspen tree that just so happens to be placed right next to the bridge. We all grabbed a leaf. We started at one side of the bridge, and I encouraged them all to create a mindful space to use this bridge as their opportunity for transformation. So we walk across this bridge, one foot in front of the other, all of us at our own pace, in our own space, at our own time. And we get to the other side of this bridge, and there's a couple that's in our group with us. And I remember watching their embrace halfway through the Bridge of Transformation before they came back with their transformation. And this embrace that they held was just one of the most powerful embraces I've ever witnessed. And I got to watch them truly become the leaf on each other's tree. I just watched as their ego and their me-first attitude that I'd seen all week long just melted away. And I saw them truly see each other for what was at least the first time in a week, probably the first time in years. And I just so deeply felt their need for transformation in the same way that I needed it, to be able to become a leaf on the tree. So we all decide to take a deep breath, soak it in, then we walk back across this Bridge of Transformation. And I tell you this story not to say that I haven't been burnt out since, haven't lost moments of my magic along the way, haven't had times where I felt like the tree. But I tell you this story because ultimately, our life culminates to a drop falling down a waterfall. Our entirety of our life culminates to how big we can grow our leaf so that we can contribute more to our tree, to our family, to our friends, to our community, to those that matter to us. I tell you this story so that you will find your bridge of transformation, so that you may seek out opportunities to be reminded that you are not the tree, that you are a leaf on the tree, and that if we all shift our perspective to growth and contribution, we will live in a world full of givers, not takers. We'll be able to show up for one another without asking what's in it for me. To honor my friend Jamin, I just want to invite you to please join me in being a leaf on the tree.